In this video, we're going to look at a specific case study, and what we're going to be discussing is the power challenges faced by the county of Cornwall in the southwest of England. So we're going to begin with an overview of the problem, and we're also going to begin looking at some possible solutions. So first of all, we will introduce the distribution network operator for the southwest of England, and we'll briefly recap some of the challenges regarding the north-south power flow. We'll look at how distributed generation may well be a solution for Cornwall, and finally we'll look at Cornwall's resources, and by resources there I mean resources in terms of renewable energy. So in the southwest of England, the distribution network operator is Western Power Distribution. Cornwall is the county down here located in the southwest of England. So the network operator responsible for this region is Western Power Distribution. Now, as we spoke about in an earlier tutorial, one of the challenges faced by the southwest of England in particular is caused by something called the north-south power flow. And what we spoke about was how most of the generating capacity is in the north of England and the Midlands, whereas demand in the southwest exceeds generation capacity. So the southwest are somewhat reliant on energy from other areas, and that presents various different challenges. We also mentioned one of the possible solutions, and one of the possible solutions was to look at distributed generation, and there Cornwall would potentially produce their own electricity, which would be fed into their own distribution network for use around the county, rather than being fed into the transmission network. And we saw how this might work in terms of micro-generation by individual properties and small-scale generation, which could be used to feed factories and various other different commercial buildings. Any surplus from either of those sources could then be fed into the distribution network and then could be resupplied to other properties in the county that didn't have generating capacity. But what we really need to consider first of all is what benefit is there to Cornwall for doing this? Now, one of the most important reasons why Cornwall would want to generate their own electricity is for security of supply. Now, to a certain degree at the moment, if there was a power crisis, it would be the southwest of England that would most likely be affected. We've all become so reliant on electricity, being without electricity, even for a small period of time, has the potential to cause massive problems and disruption. The other important factor of security of supply is something called the capacity margin. Now, the capacity margin is about having a surplus, about having additional energy producing capacity above and beyond what's currently being used. Now, at the moment, Cornwall doesn't have any surplus capacity. Ideally, they would want standby energy or a surplus that they could feed back into the transmission network. But as it stands at the moment, they don't have that luxury. Now, another important factor is that the cost of energy in the southwest is going to be higher than elsewhere in the country. Now, the reason for that is because although we transmit electricity at high voltages, it's still going to incur losses. So the electrical energy or power that's produced in, say, the Midlands of the UK is going to be diminished by the time it reaches the southwest. Therefore, the cost of those losses will be incurred by the electricity supplies in the northwest of England, and that cost would then be transferred onto the customers. Now, there'll be numerous other economic benefits, such as providing jobs to the people of Cornwall. That would be things such as construction jobs, engineering jobs and manufacturing jobs. But once this new generating capacity is in place, we're still going to need operators and maintenance technicians as an example. So it has the potential to produce a number of economic benefits, as well as potentially producing income for the region when any surplus electricity is fed into the transmission network. Now finally, let's discuss Cornwall's resources, and we're going to look specifically at renewable energy resources, as we know that there's a significant drive in the UK to produce more energy from renewable sources. So let's begin by looking at Cornwall's solar resource. Now what we're looking at here is global horizontal irradiation. In effect, it's a measure of how much solar energy is reaching different areas. So what we notice is further north tends to receive less solar radiation, but as we move further south, what we notice is the amount of solar radiation continues to increase. Now, as a direct comparison, if we look here in the southwest of England and we compare that to regions in the north of Scotland, we can see that the southwest of England receives almost 1.5 times the amount of solar radiation. So that's 1.5 times the potential generating capacity from solar energy, as an example. So that's certainly a positive for the southwest of England. So now let's look at the wind resource. Now this particular wind resource map looks at offshore capacity, and what we see is that offshore wind speeds all around the UK are fairly constant. There aren't any huge differences between different regions around the UK, and here we're looking at wind speeds ranging from around 9 metres per second up to 10 or 10.5 metres per second along the south and west coasts of the UK. So once again, this would indicate that wind power is a potential opportunity for the southwest of England. Now finally, let's look at the geothermal resource. And by the geothermal resource, we mean how much heat energy is coming from the geothermal reserve below the Earth's surface. Okay, so once again, we see a scale on the top right-hand side, starting at low levels of geothermal energy, here in blue, going all the way through the spectrum to high levels in red. Now we see some areas in the north of England that have relatively high levels of geothermal resource, but down in the southwest, here we can see indicated that some of the best geothermal reserves are actually in the southwest in our county of Cornwall. And in fact, these are some of the areas where we see the maximum geothermal potential for the whole of the United Kingdom. So that would indicate that geothermal energy is potentially a solution to the challenges faced by Cornwall. Now, although this isn't technically a resource, it is worth mentioning that in the southwest of England we do have some higher ground. You'll recall that when we looked at pumping stations for hydroelectricity, what we needed was hills or mountains in order to site the upper reservoir. So what we do see in the southwest of England is some high ground where we could potentially incorporate reservoirs that could be used for storage of electricity using a pumped hydroelectric storage station as an example. So that's another potential opportunity that could address some of the challenges that are being faced. Okay, so to summarise, we've talked about some of the challenges faced by the southwest of England as a result of the north to south power flow. We've also mentioned how distributed generation may be a way for the county of Cornwall to overcome some of these problems. And finally, we've looked at some of the resources that are potentially available to Cornwall so that they could potentially expand their renewable energy provision.